On a quiet stretch of highway outside Millbrook Valley, an extraordinary encounter is about to unfold. When a stranded Tesla pulls to the side of the road, its billionaire owner expects to call her premium roadside service. Instead, she's about to cross paths with Thomas Mitchell, a master mechanic who spent 50 years helping every broken-down car that crosses his path. What she doesn't know is that Tommy isn't just any Good Samaritan, he's the man she left behind half a century ago, choosing ambition over love. And what he doesn't realize is that the elegant woman in designer heels is Sarah Jensen, the small-town girl who drove away in her father's Chevy and built a technology empire worth billions. This isn't just another romance story. This is about how fate orchestrates the most unlikely reunions and how two hearts separated by time, wealth, and circumstance are about to discover that some loves never break down. They just need a skilled hand to get them running again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun hadn't quite cleared the mountains when Tommy Mitchell unlocked the weathered door of Mitchell's Auto Repair. The familiar scent of motor oil and decades of honest work greeted him like an old friend. At 72, his movements were slower than they used to be, but his hands remained steady, the kind of steadiness that came from fixing engines since he was tall enough to peek under a hood. He moved through his morning ritual with practiced ease, brewing coffee in the ancient percolator his father had left behind. The machine itself had nearly given up several times over the years, but Tommy always managed to coax it back to life. "Everything's got a soul," his father used to say, "and everything with a soul deserves a second chance." The words echoed in his mind as he pulled his father's toolbox from its place of honor on the workshop wall. The red metal box was scratched and dented, each mark telling its own story. Tommy's fingers traced the worn edges as he opened it, revealing them meticulously. Maintained tools inside. Some were original, the socket wrench his father had used to teach him his first repair, the screwdrivers with handles worn to fit only their hands. Others were newer, but all were arranged with the same careful precision his father had insisted upon. "A messy toolbox means a messy mind, Tommy boy," he could still hear the old man saying, "and you can't fix what's broken if your mind's not right." The bell above the shop door chimed, and Mike Henderson's familiar heavy footsteps followed. Every morning for the past 30 years, Mike had arrived at precisely 7:15 with 2 fresh apple fritters from his diner down the street. "Morning, troublemaker," Mike called out, setting a grease-stained paper bag on the workbench. At 68, Mike was the closest thing to a brother Tommy had left in Millbrook Valley. They'd shared everything over the years, triumph and heartbreak, wedding days and funeral services. Mike had been there the day Sarah left, and he'd been there every day since, watching Tommy build a life from the pieces she'd left behind. "One of these days," Tommy replied, reaching for the bag, "you're going to kill me with these fritters." "Ha! These fritters are what's keeping you alive, old man. That, and all these cars that conveniently break down right when you're getting too quiet in your head." Tommy smiled, knowing the truth in Mike's words. The work kept him going, gave him purpose. Every car that limped into his shop was a puzzle to solve, a wrong to right. He'd built a reputation over the decades. The mechanic who never turned anyone away, who could diagnose an engine's ailment just by listening to its troubled purr. "Speaking of quiet," Mike continued, settling into his usual spot on the worn office chair, "you missed breakfast at the diner yesterday. Had half the town worried you'd finally retired." Tommy snorted, wiping sugar from his fingers. "Retire and leave you without anyone to complain to? I was just busy with the Johnson kid's Mustang. Someone taught that boy everything wrong about maintaining a classic." "Always the teacher," Mike chuckled. "You know, the shop across town's gone all digital now. Computers telling them what's wrong with the cars. What do you think about that?" Tommy shook his head, moving to organize his workbench for the day ahead. "Computers can tell you what's wrong, sure, but they can't tell you why. Can't feel the history in an engine, can't understand what it's trying to say. Every car that comes through that door has a story, Mike, just like every person. The morning light was streaming through the workshop windows now, catching the dust. Motes in golden beams. Tommy's eyes fell on the faded photograph tucked into the corner of his bulletin board, a much younger version of himself, leaning against a '57 Chevy, a dark-haired girl smiling up at him. He'd stopped actively looking at it years ago, but he always knew it was there, like a scar you stop noticing but never quite forget. "Well," Mike said, standing with a grunt, "I better get back before Clara starts wondering if I'm treating the diner like a retirement home. You coming by for lunch?" "Always do," Tommy replied, already reaching for his father's toolbox. The day was calling, and there were things that needed fixing. Sarah Jensen's Tesla Model S gave its first warning 50 miles outside of Millbrook Valley. The sleek dashboard display flashed an alert she'd never seen before. Something about the electrical system that made her stomach tighten. At 68, she'd learned to trust her instincts, and right now they were telling her this wasn't just another minor inconvenience. "Ms. Jensen, please let me arrange for the premium roadside assistance." Alice's voice came through the car's speakers. Her executive assistant had been monitoring the vehicle's telemetry from New York, a feature Sarah usually appreciated. "There's a certified Tesla service center about 90 miles from your location. I can have them send—" "No," Sarah cut in, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. She watched the familiar landscape roll past her window, hills that had haunted her dreams for 50 years. "I'm almost there, Alice. I'll handle this my way. With all due respect, Miss Jensen, you have the board meeting on Thursday, and the Singapore investors are expecting—" The car shuddered, and Sarah guided it onto the shoulder of Route 23, the same road she'd taken out of town all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. She reached into her Hermes bag, fingers brushing against the worn leather planner she'd kept since her first million. Tucked inside its pages was a yellowed business card. "Mitchell's Auto Repair. We fix what others can't." "Alice, I'll call." "You back?" she said, ending the connection before her assistant could protest. The planner felt heavy in her hands. She'd never thrown the card away, though she'd told herself countless times that she kept it only as a reminder of where she'd started. A reminder of the girl who used to pump gas at that shop every summer, dreaming of bigger things, while a boy with motor oil on his hands taught her about timing belts and distributors. The morning sun was warm on her face as she stepped out of the car, her Louboutin heels crunching on the gravel shoulder. She'd dressed for meetings with venture capitalists, not for standing on the side of a country road. The silk blouse and tailored suit felt like armor now, protecting Sarah Jensen, the tech billionaire, from Sarah Jensen, the small-town girl who'd once sworn she'd never look back. A truck was approaching, slowing as it neared her stranded Tesla. Sarah straightened, one hand absently touching the simple gold chain around her neck, a habit she'd developed whenever she felt uncertain. The truck was old, but well-maintained, the kind of vehicle that spoke of honest work and reliability. As it pulled up behind her car, she caught sight of faded lettering on the door. "Mitchell's Auto Repair." Her heart stumbled. It couldn't be. She'd planned to visit the shop, yes, but on her terms, after she'd prepared herself, after she'd rehearsed what she might say to explain 50 years of silence. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. The truck's door opened, and Sarah watched. As a man emerged, he moved more slowly than she remembered, but with the same deliberate grace she'd always associated with him. His hair was silver now, but he wore the same type of worn jeans and work shirt, the same trustworthy set to his shoulders. "Having some trouble, ma'am?" The voice was familiar as her own reflection, though roughened by age. She saw the moment he registered her car's custom plates. "SJ Tech," his eyebrows lifting slightly. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. How do you say hello to someone you've never stopped saying goodbye to? How do you explain that success tastes like ashes when you've built an empire on the foundation of your biggest regret? "Yes," she managed finally, her voice steadier than she felt. Something's wrong with the electrical system, I think. He nodded, already moving toward the car with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime diagnosing mechanical ailments. She watched him study the sleek lines of the Tesla, noting how he adapted his approach to this vehicle so different from the ones they'd worked on together in their youth. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, and for a moment she was 18 again, watching him lean over her father's Chevy, teaching her how to hear an engine's secrets. "Please," she said softly, and wondered if he could hear everything she wasn't saying. Tommy pulled his diagnostic tablet from the truck, a concession to modern times he'd made 5 years ago when classic cars started coming with computer chips. There was something almost poetic about using it on a Tesla, though his hands itched for the familiar weight of his regular tools. He'd learned about electric vehicles, of course. You couldn't stay in business these days without adapting. Still, he preferred engines you could reason with, using all 5 senses. Reaching into his back pocket, he retrieved his red bandana, the same one he'd carried every day for the past 40 years. Some habits die hard, and this one had served him well through countless repairs. As he wiped his hands, a fragment of memory flickered. Another red bandana, another time, tied around a young girl's dark hair as she bent over an engine beside him. The woman standing nearby shifted slightly, her expensive heels unsuited for the gravel shoulder. Something about her movement caught his attention. A familiar tilt of the head, perhaps, or the way her fingers worried at the gold chain around her neck. But Tommy had learned long ago not to let memories distract him from the task at hand. "Your power management system's throwing up some unusual readings," he said, eyes on the diagnostic screen. "Mind if I pop the front trunk?" "Of course not," she replied. And again there was something in her voice that tugged at him, like a melody heard from another room. "I appreciate you stopping. My assistant wanted to have it towed, but sometimes the simplest solution is the best one," Tommy finished, reaching for the hood release. The words were out before he could catch them, an echo of something he used to say years ago to another dark-haired woman who'd trusted him with her car's ailments. He felt her start slightly, saw her hands clench around her designer handbag. The morning sun caught the edge of her face, and for a moment the years seemed to blur. Tommy forced his attention back to the Tesla's electrical components, but his mind was starting to race, putting together pieces he wasn't sure he wanted to examine too closely. "You've been doing this a long time," she observed, and it wasn't quite a question. "All my life," he answered, hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the unfamiliar territory. "Started in my father's shop. Never found any reason to stop. The shop in town, Mitchell's." His hands stilled for just a moment. "That's right, still there, same place it's always been." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Tommy focused on the task before him, but he could feel her watching his movements, studying him with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "The problem's not as serious as it seems," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "Looks like a sensor malfunction in the cooling system. It's causing the computer to think there's a bigger issue." His fingers traced the familiar path of diagnosis and repair, even as his mind catalogued more details. The way she stood, the cadence of her breath, the subtle scent of an expensive perfume that couldn't quite mask something achingly familiar. "Can you fix it?" she asked, and there was a tremor in her voice that had nothing to do with car trouble. Tommy straightened, wiping his hands again on the red bandana. "Already have. Just needed to reset the system and bypass the faulty sensor. It'll get you where you're going, but you'll want to have it properly replaced soon." He hesitated, then added, "I could do it at the shop if you'd like. Wouldn't take more than an hour." She drew in a sharp breath, and Tommy finally allowed himself to really look at her. The designer clothes and carefully maintained appearance couldn't hide what his heart had been trying to tell him since he first heard her voice. 50 years fell away in an instant, and suddenly he was 22 again, watching another elegant woman prepare to drive away from Millbrook Valley. "Sarah," he said softly, the name feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. It wasn't a question, he knew now with absolute certainty, but it hung in the air between them like an unfinished symphony. The color drained from her face, and her hand flew to that gold chain again. "Hello, Tommy," she whispered, and in those two words lay half a century of choices, regrets, and unspoken explanations. The morning sun seemed to pause between them, casting long shadows across the shoulder of Route 23. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the weight of recognition settle around them like autumn leaves. The distant hum of passing cars felt dreamlike, unreal against the sudden rush of memories that threatened to overwhelm them both. Sarah's hand slipped into her wallet, fingers finding the worn edge of a photograph she'd carried for 50 years. She didn't need to look at it anymore. Every detail was etched into her heart. July 15th, 1973, the day everything changed. In her mind, she was there again. A warm Sunday evening, the air thick with possibility and the scent of summer grass. Tommy had just closed up the shop, and they were sitting in his father's restored Pontiac, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of promise. "I got in," she'd told him, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "Full scholarship to MIT. They want me in their computer science program." The acceptance letter had arrived that morning, heavy with the weight of dreams fulfilled. Tommy had turned to her then, his young face full of pride and something else, something that looked too much like goodbye. "That's wonderful, Sarah. I always knew you were meant for bigger things." In the present, Tommy found himself adjusting his toolbox, his hands seeking the comfort of familiar tools as his own memories surfaced. He remembered how his heart had splintered that evening, even as he smiled and told her to chase her dreams. He'd known even then that loving someone meant sometimes letting them go. "You could come with me," she'd suggested, hope making her voice bright. "There are mechanics in Boston, good ones. You could start your own shop there." But they both knew he couldn't. His father had just had his first heart attack. The shop was struggling, and Millbrook Valley was in his blood as surely as motor. Oil was in his veins. Some roots run too deep to transplant. "The shop needs me," he'd said simply. "Dad needs me." Sarah blinked back to the present, her fingers still tracing the edge of the hidden photograph. She remembered how final those words had felt, how they'd echoed in her ears as she packed her bags that night. She'd left before dawn the next morning, unable to bear another goodbye. "You kept the shop going," she said now, her voice soft with half a century of unspoken questions. Tommy nodded, his eyes finding the faded sign in the distance that still bore his father's name alongside his own. "Dad passed 3 years after you left. Heart finally gave out." He paused, a lifetime of memories crossing his face. The shop was his legacy. Couldn't let it die with him. Sarah's throat tightened. She'd read about Joseph Mitchell's passing in the local paper someone had sent her. By then, she'd been in California, building her first tech company, too busy chasing success to attend the funeral, or perhaps too afraid to face what she'd left behind. "I saw your name in the papers," Tommy continued, his voice carefully neutral. "All those years, watching you build your empire." He smiled slightly. "Dad always said you'd change the world someday." The mention of Joseph Mitchell hit Sarah like a physical blow. He'd been like a second father to her, teaching her about cars alongside Tommy during those summer afternoons that now felt like scenes from someone else's life. "I still have that first computer he helped me build," she admitted, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "He let us turn half the office into a workshop that summer, said anything worth learning was worth making room for." Tommy's hand stilled on his toolbox. He remembered that summer, 1972, when Sarah had become obsessed with the idea of building a personal computer. His father had watched them work for weeks, Sarah's determination matching Tommy's patience as they soldered circuits and debugged endless problems. "He believed in you," Tommy said quietly. "We both did." Sarah pulled the photograph from her wallet then, holding it out like an offering. The edges were soft with age, but the image was clear. 2 young people in front of Mitchell's auto repair, a half-built computer on the workbench between them, their faces bright with shared purpose and unspoken love. Tommy took it carefully, his weathered hands gentle with this fragment of their shared past. "I have the same one," he admitted. "In my office. Never could bring myself to take it down." The confession hung between them, heavy with decades of choices, regrets, and paths not taken. Around them, the morning traffic continued its steady flow, but here on this patch of shoulder, time seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what these two hearts, older now, but perhaps wiser, would do with this unexpected chance to rewrite their ending. Tommy handed the photograph back to Sarah, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The touch, slight as it was, sent a jolt through them both, a spark of connection that neither was prepared for. He noticed she was wearing her high school ring on a chain beneath her silk blouse, the small gold band catching the morning light. "You kept it," he said, nodding toward the ring. The same ring he'd given her on graduation night, back when they thought love could conquer any distance. Sarah's hand went to the ring instinctively. "I never could take it off," she admitted, "even when I probably should have, even when Marcus, my late husband, asked about it." She paused, studying Tommy's face. "Did you ever marry?" "No." Tommy turned back to his tools, needing the familiar routine to steady himself. "Came close once, about 10 years after you left. Janet Porter. You remember her? She taught at the elementary school." "I remember," Sarah said softly. "She always wanted to be a teacher. She wanted a lot of things, a family, a different life than I could give her." Tommy closed his toolbox with a decisive click. "She said I was too stuck in the past. Guess she wasn't entirely wrong." The morning traffic had thinned, leaving them in a pocket of quiet broken only by the whisper of wind through the roadside grass. Sarah watched as Tommy's hands, still strong, still capable, moved through the familiar motions of packing up his equipment. "I looked for you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could catch them. "Every time I came back to visit my parents before they moved to Florida. I'd drive by the shop, but I never saw you." Tommy's movements stilled. "Thursdays," he said after a moment. "You always came on Thursdays. I started taking Thursdays off after the second time I saw your car pass by. Coward's way out, I suppose." The admission hung between them, honest and raw. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, remembering those Thursday drives, the way her heart would race as she approached the shop, the mixture of relief and disappointment when she didn't see his truck parked outside. "We were so young," she whispered. "Too young to know what we had," Tommy agreed. "Too old now to pretend it didn't matter." A truck rumbled past, breaking the moment. Tommy straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. "The car's fixed for now, but that sensor needs proper replacing. Shop's about 3 miles down the road, same place it's always been." Sarah glanced at her Tesla, then back at Tommy. He looked solid, real in a way that her world of board meetings and venture capital rarely felt. "Is that an invitation?" "Could be," he said carefully. "If you want it to be." She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the screen. With a few taps, she could call her driver, have him bring the Bentley from her hotel in the next town. Over, she could walk away from this moment, preserve the past in its neat, crystallized form. Instead, she found herself saying, "I should make sure the repair holds." Tommy nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. "Follow me then. I'll drive." "Slow. Make sure everything's running right." As they moved to their respective vehicles, Sarah caught a glimpse of their reflection in her car's polished surface. The elegant businesswoman and the small-town mechanic, separated by a lifetime of choices, but connected by something that 50 years hadn't managed to break. The Tesla's electric motor hummed to life, a sound so different from the rumbling engines of their youth. In her rear-view mirror, Tommy's repair truck pulled out onto the road, its familiar silhouette leading her back toward a past she'd spent half a century trying to outrun. Her phone buzzed. Alice, probably wondering why her GPS showed her stopped for so long. Sarah silenced it, without looking. Some moments demanded to be lived without interruption, and she had a feeling this was one of them. The 3-mile drive to Mitchell's Auto Repair felt both eternal and impossibly brief. Sarah watched Tommy's truck ahead of her, its familiar logo faded, but still proud against the red paint. Each landmark they passed was a memory. The old Williams farm, now a suburban development. The creek where they'd spent countless summer afternoons. The intersection where she'd first learned to parallel park under Tommy's patient guidance. The shop itself had changed little. The original sign still, and hung, though the paint was weather-worn, and the building had acquired a few more character lines around its edges. Tommy pulled his truck around to the front, gesturing for her to park in the empty bay nearest the office. As Sarah cut the Tesla's power, she caught sight of a newspaper clipping framed on the wall. Even from this distance, she recognized her own face, younger but not young, staring out from a Fortune magazine cover story. Sarah Jensen, the woman revolutionizing Silicon Valley. Tommy followed her gaze as he stepped out of his truck. "Class of '73 did pretty well for itself," he said, his voice carrying a mix of pride and something more complicated. "Between you and David Chen becoming a senator, we made quite a mark." "David Chen?" Sarah smiled despite herself. "I haven't thought about him in years. He was always running for class president." Aimed a little higher in the end, Tommy moved to open the office door, the familiar creak of its hinges unchanged by time. "Coffee's still terrible, but you're welcome to it." Sarah stepped inside, and the scent of motor oil, coffee, and old paperwork wrapped around her like a forgotten embrace. The office was a time capsule, the same desk, the same cork bulletin board covered in business cards and thank-you notes, the same worn couch where she used to study while Tommy worked on cars. "It's exactly the same," she murmured, running her fingers along the edge of the desk. "Not everything," Tommy replied, moving to the ancient coffee maker. "Computers knew, had to adapt, much as it pained me. Can't run a business on paper invoices anymore." Sarah turned to him, really looking at him now in the familiar light of the office. Age had been kind to Tommy Mitchell. His hair might be silver, but his eyes were the same clear blue that had once made her heart skip beats in senior English class. His hands, preparing coffee with practiced movements, still looked strong and capable. "Why didn't you ever expand?" she asked suddenly. "You could have franchised, built a chain. You had the skill, the reputation." Tommy handed her a chipped mug. Cream, no sugar, just as she'd always taken it. "Didn't want an empire," he said simply. "Wanted a life where I could know every customer's name, where I could take the time to do things right." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Not everyone dreams of changing the world, Sarah." The words weren't accusatory, but they hit her like a physical force. She set the coffee down, untasted. "Is that what you think I was doing? Chasing dreams of changing the world? Weren't you?" His voice was gentle. "The Sarah Jensen I knew couldn't rest until she'd solved every puzzle, fixed every problem. The world was too small for you here." "The world was never too small," she said, her voice catching. "I was too afraid it might be enough, that I might be happy with just this, with just us, and never know what else I could become." Tommy absorbed this, his face thoughtful. "And did you become what you wanted?" Sarah looked around the office, at the life she might have had, at the man who had once been her whole world. "I became more than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "Built things I'm proud of. Changed how people live and work. But standing here," she trailed off, picking up an old wrench that sat on the desk. "Standing here, I wonder if I understood the difference between enough and everything." The morning light filtered through the dusty office windows, casting patterns on the floor between them. Outside, the sounds of Millbrook Valley continued. Cars passing, birds calling, life moving forward as it always had. But in this room, time seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what these two people, shaped by 50 years of separate lives, might build from the ruins of their shared past. A familiar bell chimed as Tommy pushed open the door to Mike's diner, holding it for Sarah as she stepped inside. The lunch rush hadn't started yet, but the handful of regular customers turned to look, conversations faltering as they recognized who had just walked in. Sarah Jensen's return to Millbrook Valley wasn't just news, it was history, walking through the door. Mike was behind the counter, wiping down the same stretch of formica he'd been maintaining for 30 years. His hand froze mid-motion as he caught sight of them, eyes widening as he recognized Sarah. The coffee pot he'd been about to fill stayed suspended in air. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, loud enough for them to hear. Tommy led Sarah to their old booth. Still there, still the same worn red vinyl, still positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun through the front windows. As they slid into opposite sides, both noticed how naturally they fell into their old seats, muscle memory unchanged by decades. "Your usual booth," Sarah observed, running her fingers along the table's edge. "Some things never change." "More things than you'd think," Tommy replied, watching as Mike approached. Coffee pot, finally remembered in his hand. "Sarah Jensen," Mike said, his voice warm with recognition. "Last time I saw you, you were trying to convince this stubborn fool to computerize his inventory system." He gestured at Tommy with the coffee pot. "Did he ever do it?" Sarah asked, accepting a cup of coffee with a grateful smile. "Kicking and screaming," Mike confirmed, pouring Tommy's coffee without asking. "Only took him 20 years, and Clara threatening to quit doing his books by hand." The mention of Clara, Mike's wife and the diner's co-owner, brought a wave of memories. Clara had been the one to help Sarah pack the night before she left for MIT, the one who'd held her while she cried about leaving Tommy behind. "How is Clara?" Sarah asked, her voice softening. "Still running this place better than I ever could," Mike replied. "She'll be sorry she missed you. Takes Tuesdays off now. Doctor's orders." He paused, studying them both. "Want your usual orders?" Tommy nodded, but Sarah looked surprised. "You remember my order? Apple pancakes, extra cinnamon, bacon, extra crispy," Mike recited. "Some orders you don't forget." He gave them both a knowing look before heading back to the kitchen. Silence settled between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken words. Through the window, they could see the town square, where the old courthouse still stood proud against the morning sky. The bench where they'd shared their first kiss was still there, though the oak tree that had shaded it had grown another 50 years broader. "Mike and Clara," Sarah said finally, wrapping her manicured hands around the coffee mug. "They made it work." "They did," Tommy agreed. "Through 3 kids, 2 recessions, and Clara's cancer scare last year. Still going strong." Sarah absorbed this, thinking of her own marriage. Successful on paper, comfortable, but never quite complete. Marcus had been a good man, a supportive husband, but there had always been a part of her heart he couldn't reach, a part that had stayed behind in Millbrook Valley. "I was sorry to hear about Marcus," Tommy said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "The news coverage said it was sudden." "Heart attack during a board meeting," Sarah nodded. 2 years ago, he was doing what he loved, arguing about market projections." She smiled sadly. "He used to joke that he was my second-choice CEO. Was he? For the company? No. He was brilliant at business, better than I ever was. For everything else." She let the sentence hang unfinished. Mike returned with their food, setting down plates that could have been transported straight from 1973. Apple pancakes for Sarah, Denver omelet for Tommy. The familiar aroma of cinnamon and coffee wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, cutting into her pancakes. "These taste exactly the same. All the restaurants in New York, all the 5-star breakfasts in Silicon Valley, and nothing ever quite matched Mike's pancakes." "Because Mike makes them with history," Tommy replied, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his coffee cup. "Everything here has history, Sarah. Every booth, every cup of coffee, every morning sunrise over that courthouse. It's not better or worse than what you built out there. It's just different, real in a way that doesn't need stock prices to prove its worth." The truth of his words settled around them as they ate, each lost in thoughts of paths taken and not taken. of lives lived and dreams deferred. Outside, Millbrook Valley continued its quiet Tuesday morning rhythm, unaware that in a booth at Mike's Diner, two hearts were slowly remembering how to beat in time with each other again. After breakfast, they found themselves walking through the town square, their footsteps naturally slowing as they passed familiar landmarks. Sarah had slipped off her heels, carrying them in one hand. Designer shoes weren't made for Millbrook Valley's brick sidewalks. She'd also shed her suit jacket, and something about her looked softer in just the silk blouse, more like the girl who used to walk these same streets. "Do you remember," she said, pausing by the old courthouse steps, "when you taught me to drive? Stick shift right here? Sunday mornings, because no one was around to see me stall your father's truck." Tommy smiled, the memory clear as yesterday. Dad knew, you know. He could tell someone was riding his clutch. Said nothing for weeks, just kept adjusting it without a word. "He knew everything that happened in that shop," Sarah said softly. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Her first one, faded and worn. "I found this when I was going through some old boxes after Marcus died. Sarah Jensen, Software Solutions, my first company before the IPO, before Silicon Valley. I was so proud of this little card." Tommy took it carefully, studying the simple design. "I remember when you started that company. Read about it in the local paper. Local girl makes good in Boston tech scene. Cut out every article I could find. You followed my career." Something in her voice trembled. "Hard not to. You were everywhere for a while there. The magazines, the TV interviews. The woman changing the face of technology." He handed the card back. "Kept thinking about that computer we built in Dad's office. How your eyes lit up when it finally worked." Sarah's fingers closed around the card. "I still have all the notes. We made, you know, every diagram, every circuit design. They're in a box in my penthouse in Manhattan." She laughed softly. "My curator wanted to put them in the company museum, but I couldn't. They felt too personal." They reached the park bench under the old oak tree, and by unspoken agreement, they sat down. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground at their feet. "I almost came back," Sarah said suddenly. "In '82, when my first company was taking off, I had an offer to buy out a tech firm in Hartford. Would have put me just 2 hours away." She stared at her bare feet on the brick pathway. "I drove up here one Thursday, sat in my car, across from the shop for an hour. October 15th, Tommy said quietly. "I saw you, watched from the office window, wondering if you'd come in." Sarah's head snapped up. "But you always took Thursdays off." "Not that Thursday. Dad was sick, needed me to cover." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "You sat there in that red BMW, and I kept thinking about walking out there, tapping on your window. But what would I have said? 'Hey, how's changing the world working out for you?' I would have stayed," she whispered. "If you'd come out that day, I would have stayed." The weight of that admission hung between them. Tommy turned to look at her, really look at her, seeing both the successful businesswoman she'd become and the young girl who'd dreamed of building computers in his father's shop. "No," he said gently, "you wouldn't have, and I wouldn't have. Wanted you to. Not then. You had too much left to do, too many dreams left to chase." He paused. "Sarah Jensen doesn't settle for almost anything." She blinked back sudden tears. "Is that what you think I did, chase dreams? Because sometimes, sitting in my office, looking out over Manhattan, I wonder if I was actually running away. From this town, from the simplicity of what we had, from—" She gestured between them. "From how easy it was to love you." Tommy absorbed this, watching a young couple cross the square, their hands intertwined, their whole lives ahead of them. "Love was never our problem," he said finally. "Timing was. You needed to become Sarah Jensen, tech pioneer. I needed to be Tommy Mitchell, small-town mechanic. We couldn't have become those people together. Not then. And now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Tommy could answer, a church bell rang in the distance, marking the hour. Sarah glanced at her watch, a habit of a lifetime spent in meetings, and reality seemed to crash back in. "I have a call with Tokyo at noon," she said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "The time difference." Tommy nodded, understanding as he always had. The world doesn't stop spinning just because we found each other again. But as they stood to walk back to their vehicles, both felt the weight of time differently than they had that morning. Sometimes they were learning. The hardest part of losing something is finding it again and realizing that the real cost wasn't in the losing, but in all the moments that could have been. Sarah's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since they left the park. As they walked back to the shop, each notification seemed to pull her further from Millbrook Valley and closer to the world she'd built for herself. Tommy watched as she glanced at the screen for the third time in as many minutes. "Problems?" he asked, holding the shop door open for her. "Merger complications in Singapore. Board members getting nervous." She sighed, slipping the phone back into her purse. "Sometimes I think I've built a machine that never stops running." Inside the shop, the contrast between their worlds became even starker. While Sarah's phone chirped with international business demands, Tommy's landline rang with Mrs. Henderson's concerns about her grandson's first car. He answered it with the same patient attention he'd always given his neighbors. "No, Mrs. Henderson, you tell Bobby that car's too much for a first-time driver. Bring him by the shop. I've got a reliable Civic that'll serve him better." He caught Sarah's eye as he spoke, seeing the hint of a smile play across her face. "Yes, ma'am. Tomorrow morning's fine." As he hung up, Sarah was already responding to an email on her phone. "My assistants booked a helicopter to get me back to Manhattan for tomorrow's board meeting. Apparently, there's going to be a vote of confidence." She looked up, her expression troubled. "The old guard's not happy with the direction I'm taking the company." Tommy moved to his workbench, picking up a community service award the town had given him last year for his youth mentorship program. "Sounds complicated," he said, his voice neutral. "It is. We're pushing for more sustainable technology, trying to make our products last longer instead of just selling new ones every year." She laughed without humor. "Turns out Wall Street doesn't like it when you prioritize the planet over profits. But you're doing it anyway. Someone has to." She watched as he placed the award back on its shelf, next to a collection of thank-you cards from local students he'd mentored. "You understand that, don't you? Making choices because they're right, not because they're profitable." Tommy nodded toward his wall of cards and modest accolades. "Different scale, same principle. Every kid who comes through that door gets the same honest advice, whether their parents can afford repairs or not. Dad taught me that." Sarah moved closer to the wall, reading some of the cards. "Thank you for teaching me that I can fix things myself. You helped me believe in my dreams. Thanks for showing me that hard work matters more than fancy tools." She turned to him. "You're changing lives too, Tommy, just in a different way." "One car, one kid at a time," he agreed. "It's enough." The word hung between them, enough, echoing their earlier conversation. Sarah's phone buzzed again, and this time the caller ID showed board chairman. "I have to take this," she said apologetically, stepping outside. Through the window, Tommy watched her pace the parking lot, her professional mask sliding firmly into place. Her voice carried faintly, words like stakeholder value and sustainable innovation drifting in on the morning breeze. She looked every inch the CEO now, gesturing emphatically as she laid out her vision to unseen executives. His own day was calling too. Mrs. Peterson's Buick needed an oil change, and young Jake Martinez was coming by to learn about basic engine maintenance. Part of Tommy's ongoing effort to help local kids understand the value of working with their hands. When Sarah came back inside, her face was tight with tension. "They're moving the board meeting up to today. The helicopter will be here in an hour." She paused, conflict clear in her eyes. "Tommy, I need to go," he finished for her. "I understand, Sarah. Some responsibilities don't wait." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume, mingling with the lingering scent of Mike's diner coffee. "But some do," she said softly. "Some wait 50 years, if they have to." Before either could say more, her phone rang again. The spell broke, reality reasserting itself with each electronic chirp. Sarah answered it mechanically, already turning. Toward the door, already becoming again the Sarah Jensen that the world knew. CEO, innovator, billionaire. Tommy watched her go, thinking about choices and consequences, about lives lived in parallel, about how sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is knowing exactly why you can't keep them. Sarah paced the shop's small office, her helicopter appointment temporarily postponed after a quick call to her assistant. She'd spent the last 15 minutes staring at the contract proposal on her phone, her heart racing with an idea that had struck her during her board call. "You're thinking too hard," Tommy said from his position by the workbench. "I recognize that look from when you were trying to debug that computer in '73. She turned to face him, her expression a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "Tommy, what if there was a way to combine both our worlds?" He raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "SJ Tech is launching a new initiative, sustainable technology education centers across the country, places where people can learn to repair their devices instead of just replacing them. We're trying to fight the throwaway culture that's killing our planet." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But we need people who understand both the technical side and the human side, people who know how to teach, how to inspire." Understanding dawned in Tommy's eyes. "Sarah, I've seen how you work with these kids, Tommy. How you teach them not just about cars, but about responsibility, about taking pride in fixing things." She moved closer to his workbench. "We could set up the first center right here in Millbrook Valley. You could keep the shop, keep doing what you love, but on a bigger scale, help more people, teach more kids." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his hands absently organizing tools that were already perfectly arranged. "And who would run this center?" "You would," Sarah said softly, "as the director of our pilot program. Full autonomy, full support from SJ Tech. We'd provide the resources, the technology, but the soul of it, that would be all you." She pulled up the contract on her phone, hands slightly trembling as she showed him the details. The salary figure made his eyes widen slightly, but he kept reading, his expression thoughtful. "This is quite an offer," he said finally. "But why here? Why me? You've got experts all over the world who jump at this chance." "Because they don't have what you have," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "They don't understand that fixing things is about more than just technical knowledge. It's about patience, about seeing the potential in what others might throw away." She gestured around the shop. "You've been doing that here for 50 years, Tommy. Imagine what you could do with real resources behind you." Tommy moved to the window, looking out at the town he'd served his entire life. "And if I say no? If I think what I'm doing here is enough?" Sarah felt her heart sink, but she pressed on. "Then you say no. This isn't an ultimatum, Tommy. It's an opportunity, if you want it." He turned back to her, his blue eyes searching her face. "And what about you? Where do you fit in? All this?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah's phone buzzed again, another board member demanding attention, but for once she ignored it. "I'd be here," she said quietly. "Not all the time, not right away, but I'm tired, Tommy. Tired of building things without heart, tired of success that doesn't mean anything." She took a deep breath. "The board wants me to step back anyway, take on more of an advisory role. Maybe it's time I listened." Tommy's expression softened. "Sarah Jensen thinking of slowing down. Now I know the world's changing. Maybe not slowing down," she smiled. "Just changing direction, finding a different kind of purpose." She gestured to the contract still displayed on her phone. "We could build something meaningful together, something that combines your wisdom with my resources, something that could really make a difference." The morning sun streamed through the shop windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, a young boy rode past on his bicycle, the same kind of young dreamer they'd both been once, full of plans and possibilities. "I'll need time to think about it," Tommy said finally. "This isn't just about me. It's about this town, these people who've trusted me all these years." Sarah nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. The opportunity isn't going anywhere." She paused, then added softly, "Neither am I. Not this time." The promise in those words filled the space between them, offering something that neither had dared to hope for just hours ago, a future where their separate paths might finally converge. News travels fast in small towns, and by early afternoon, all of Millbrook Valley was buzzing with word of Sarah Jensen's return. The local Gazette's editor, Betty Chen, had already stopped by Mike's diner 3 times trying to confirm the story, while long-time residents shared decades-old memories of the girl who'd left to chase bigger dreams. Tommy noticed the increased traffic past his shop, cars slowing just enough for their drivers to peer through the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of the hometown girl turned tech billionaire. Sarah had left for her board meeting, but her presence lingered in the whispered conversations and wondering glances. "You've caused quite a stir," Mike said, delivering Tommy's afternoon coffee personally. "Clara's phone's been ringing non-stop. Everyone wants to know if it's true, if Sarah Jensen really came home." "She didn't come home," Tommy corrected. "Accepting the coffee. She's just passing through." Mike settled into the office chair, giving Tommy a knowing look. "Is she?" "Because Betty swears she saw Sarah's driver checking out office space in the old Mason building downtown." Tommy's hands stilled on the invoice he'd been writing. "That's just gossip." "Maybe," Mike agreed. "But I also heard from Jack at the real estate office that someone representing SJ Tech made inquiries about available commercial properties." He paused, studying his oldest friend's face. "Want to tell me what's really going on, Tommy?" Before Tommy could answer, the shop door chimed. Linda Peterson, who'd taught with Sarah's mother at the high school, walked in, carrying what looked suspiciously like her famous apple pie. "Tommy Mitchell," she announced, setting the pie on his desk. "I thought you might need something sweet to help you think clearly." She gave him a meaningful look, especially with certain people stirring up old memories. "Linda," Tommy sighed, "it's not, oh, it's exactly what everyone thinks it is." She cut him off kindly. "The question is, what are you going to do about it this time?" The door chimed again, and Tommy looked up to see Jake Martinez's mother, Maria, entering with her son. The teenager had his regular auto repair lesson scheduled, but his mother's expression suggested she had more than cars on her mind. "Mr. Mitchell," Maria started, "Jake and I were wondering, if the rumors about a new technology center are true, would that mean more opportunities for kids like Jake to learn?" Tommy met Jake's hopeful gaze, remembering suddenly how Sarah had looked at 17, full of dreams and determination. "Nothing's been decided yet," he said carefully. "But it's being considered?" Jake asked, unable to hide his excitement. "Because I was reading about SJ Tech's educational initiatives, and their commitment to sustainable technology is amazing. If we had something like that here in Millbrook Valley." Tommy saw his own passion for teaching reflected in Jake's eyes, multiplied by the possibilities that Sarah's resources could provide. The boy had been coming to the shop for months, soaking up knowledge about engines and electronics with the same enthusiasm Tommy had once seen in another young dreamer. The local Gazette appeared on his desk. Betty Chen must have slipped in without him noticing. The headline read, "Local Success Story Returns, What Sarah Jensen's Visit Means for Millbrook Valley." Beneath it was a photo from their high school graduation. Tommy and Sarah standing before the auto shop, both smiling at futures they couldn't yet imagine. "You two were good for each other back then," Linda said softly, noting where Tommy's gaze had fallen. "She gave you dreams bigger than this shop, and you gave her roots strong enough to grow from. Maybe that's what you both still need." Tommy looked around his office, at the faces of friends who'd known him all his life, at the eager expression of a young man representing the future, at the photo of 2 kids who'd once thought love was enough to conquer any distance. The world Sarah was offering wasn't just about business opportunities or education initiatives. It was about bridging the gap between who they'd been and who they'd become. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Board meeting over. They've agreed to support the education centers. First location, still your choice to make. No pressure, just possibility. Outside his window, Millbrook Valley continued its daily rhythm. But Tommy could feel change in the air, not the kind that erases what was, but the kind that builds on foundations laid long ago, waiting for the right moment to grow into something new. Evening settled over Millbrook Valley, painting the shop in long shadows as Tommy stood in front of his father's old desk, holding the deed to Mitchell's auto repair. The paper was worn at the edges, his father's signature still bold against the faded document. He'd been studying it for the past hour, ever since the last curious visitor had finally left him alone with his thoughts. The proposal from Sarah lay next to it on the desk, pulled up on his computer screen. The modern meeting, the traditional, just like everything about this situation. His father's words echoed in his memory. A shop is more than just a building. Tommy, it's a promise to the community. His phone lit up with a text from Sarah. Landing back in Millbrook, could we talk? Tommy's fingers traced the embossed seal on the deed before typing his response. Shop's open. While waiting, he walked through the building that had been his life's work. Every tool had its place. Every oil stain told a story. Every repair order represented a neighbor helped. The teaching area he'd set up for local kids like Jake was small but functional. But he could imagine what it could become with real resources behind it, with Sarah's vision combined with his experience. The familiar sound of heels on concrete announced her arrival. Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking somehow both exhausted and energized. She'd changed from her morning suit into something more casual, though Tommy suspected her idea of casual still cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. The board approved everything, she said without preamble. Full funding, local autonomy, everything we discussed. They see it as good PR, but I see it as a chance to do something real. She paused, studying his expression. You're having doubts? Tommy gestured to the deed on his desk. My father built this place from nothing, worked himself into an early grave, keeping it going through the hard times. Everything I am, everything I've done for this community, started with his dream. Sarah moved closer, her eyes falling on the old document. I remember him telling us that dreams are meant to grow, not stay frozen in time. That's why he let us turn his office into a computer workshop that summer. That was different, was it? Sarah challenged gently. He saw something in both of us back then. The need to build, to fix, to make things better. This center could do that on a scale he never imagined possible. Tommy turned to face her fully. And what about you, Sarah? Are you really ready to step back from your empire? To spend time in a small town showing kids how to repair tablets instead of selling them new ones? I'm ready to build something that matters, she replied, her voice firm. Something that combines your heart with my resources. Something, she hesitated, then continued, something we could build together. The weight of that together hung in the air between them. Tommy moved to the window, looking out at the town he'd served his entire life. The streets were quiet now, but he could picture them filled with young people coming to learn, with families discovering the value of fixing rather than discarding, with a future that honored the past while embracing change. If we do this, he said slowly, it stays true to what this place has always been. A place where anyone can come for help, where every person matters, where we teach more than just technical skills. Sarah's face lit up with the beginning of hope. Those are exactly the values I want for this project, not just here, but in every center we eventually build. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume mingling with the shop's familiar scents. But it has to start here with you. Tommy looked down at his father's deed again, then at the woman who had once been the girl who helped him dream bigger than this small town. The choice before him wasn't really about business proposals or education initiatives. It was about second chances, not just for them, but for every person who would walk through these doors looking to learn, to fix, to grow. Together, he said finally, the word both a question and an answer. No corporate shortcuts. No cutting corners. We build it right." Sarah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the valley. "Together," she agreed. "The way we should have done everything 50 years ago." As the evening deepened around them, Sarah moved to her designer handbag, pulling out a bundle of worn envelopes held together with a faded ribbon. "There's something else you need to know," she said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "About why I'm really here." Tommy watched as she untied the ribbon with trembling fingers. The letters were old, their edges softened by time and handling. His breath caught as he recognized his own handwriting on several of them. "I wrote these," she began, "every year on the anniversary of the day I left. One letter for each year, for 50 years. She laid them carefully on the desk. "I never sent them." Tommy reached for his office drawer, hesitated, then pulled it. Open. Inside lay another bundle of letters, equally worn. "I wrote them too," he admitted. "Never had your address. Or maybe that was just the excuse I told myself." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she touched the envelopes. All this time," he echoed softly. She opened one of her letters, the paper crackling with age. "This one's from 1983. Dear Tommy, today I became a millionaire. The headlines call me a pioneer. A visionary. All I could think about was the computer we built in your father's shop, how your hands guided mine through each circuit connection. Success tastes hollow when you can't share it with the one person who believed in your dreams, before they were anything more than dreams." Tommy unfolded one of his own letters. 1992. Dear Sarah, watched you on the news today. You were announcing some new technology that would change the world. You looked exactly how I always knew you would. Brilliant, unstoppable. I wanted to tell you that your father would have been proud, that I'm proud, even if I have no right to be anymore. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out another letter. 1998. I married Marcus today. He's a good man, brilliant in business, kind in his way. But as I said my vows, all I could think about was a summer night in 1973, when a boy with motor oil on his hands promised me forever under the stars. I've achieved everything I dreamed of, Tommy, except the one thing I didn't know I needed until it was too late. Tommy's voice was rough as he read from another of his letters. 2005, the shop's doing well, teaching local kids about cars, about taking pride in fixing things. Every time I show them how an engine works, I remember how you used to light up when you understood a new concept. Sometimes I see you in these young dreamers, and I wonder if I did the right thing, letting you go without a fight. Sarah set down the letters, moving to the window where the last light of day was fading. I didn't come back just for the technology. Centers, she confessed. After Marcus died, I found myself reading these letters again, really reading them. 50 years of words we never said, of a life we might have had. She turned back to face him. I came back because I finally understood that success isn't just about what you build. It's about who you build it with. Tommy stood silently, processing her words, feeling the weight of 50 years of unspoken feelings. Why didn't you tell me this morning? Because I needed to know if there was still something here worth building on. If we were just living in memories, or if, she gestured to the proposal on his computer screen, if we could create something new, something that combines who we were with who we've become. Tommy moved to his father's old toolbox, opening it to reveal a hidden compartment in the bottom. Inside lay a small, worn photograph. Sarah at 17, laughing as she struggled with a circuit board. "Dad took this," he said quietly. "Said he'd never seen anyone look more at home in his shop than you did that summer. Said some people come into our lives to show us what's possible." Sarah crossed the room to look at the photograph, her shoulder brushing against his. "Your father was a wise man. He also said," Tommy continued, his voice soft, "that true love is like a well-built engine. It might need maintenance and care, but if the foundation is solid, it never really stops running." The unsent letters lay scattered across the desk. 5 decades of longing and regret spilled out in ink and paper. But as Sarah's hand found Tommy's in the gathering darkness, both felt something else taking shape. Not the bright, urgent love of their youth, but something deeper, tempered by time and understanding. The morning after their exchange of letters brought reality crashing back with the harsh ring of Sarah's phone. She answered it while standing in the shop's doorway, the early sun casting her shadow long across the concrete floor. Tommy could hear the tension in her voice even before she ended the call. "The board's having second thoughts," she said, turning to face him. Her expression was a mixture of anger and determination. "Someone leaked details about the education centers to our competitors. They're spinning it as a sign that we're losing confidence in our product line." Tommy set down the antique wrench he'd been polishing, a family heirloom that had been in the shop since his grandfather's time. "What does that mean for the project?" "They want to scale it back, make it more about marketing, less about actual education." Sarah's fingers drummed against her phone. "They're talking about turning it into a glorified showroom for our latest products." "That's not what we discussed," Tommy said quietly. "No, it's not, and I won't let them corrupt this." She began pacing, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete. "I can fight them on this, Tommy. I still own controlling interest in the company, but it'll get ugly." "How ugly?" Sarah stopped pacing, meeting his eyes. "They'll dig into everything. The project, my personal involvement, my reasons for choosing Millbrook Valley." She hesitated. "Us." The word hung between them like smoke. Tommy moved to his father's old desk, running his hand along its worn edge. "And that's a problem. They'll try to paint this as a vanity project. Say I'm letting emotions cloud my judgment, that I'm risking shareholder value for what, Sarah? A second chance with your small-town mechanic?" The words came out sharper than he intended. She flinched. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Tommy picked up the heirloom. Wrench again, its weight familiar in his hands. "Maybe they're right. Maybe we're both letting old memories blur the line between business and personal." "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" He set the wrench down with more force than necessary. "You come back here after 50 years, offer to transform my shop into some grand education center, and now, at the first sign of corporate pushback, everything's in question." Sarah's face hardened. "I'm trying to protect what we're building here." "What exactly are we building, Sarah? Because from where I stand, it looks like you're still trying to fix everything with money and influence, just like you did when you left 50 years ago." The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he'd gone too far. Sarah stepped back as if he'd struck her, her professional mask sliding into place like armor. "I thought you understood," she said, her voice cold. "I thought you of all people would see that this isn't about money or influence. It's about creating something meaningful, something that honors both our paths." "Our paths?" Tommy laughed bitterly. "Your path took you to boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. Mine kept me right here, fixing cars and teaching kids the value of honest work. Maybe they're not meant to cross after all." Sarah reached into her bag, pulling out the bundle of letters they'd shared the night before. With trembling hands, she set them on the desk. "Last night, I thought we'd finally found our timing. I thought we'd grown enough to build something real." She stepped back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I guess some things really can't be fixed." The heirloom wrench chose that moment to roll off the desk, hitting the floor with a crack that echoed through the shop. When Tommy picked it up, he found a hairline fracture running along its aged metal, a flaw that no amount of careful restoration could completely repair. "Sarah," he started, but she was already moving toward the door. "I'll have my assistant send over the paperwork to formally withdraw the proposal," she said, not turning around. "I'm sorry for disrupting your life again." The door closed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the empty shop. Tommy stood alone, holding his broken family heirloom, surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been. Outside, he heard a car start, not the familiar rumble of an engine he could fix, but the silent glide of Sarah's Tesla, taking her away from Millbrook Valley once again. Mike found Tommy exactly where he expected, sitting in his father's old office chair, staring at the broken wrench and the bundle of letters Sarah had left behind. The evening light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the shop floor. "Clara sent me," Mike announced, setting down a paper bag that smelled suspiciously of his wife's remedy for all life's problems, fresh-baked cookies. Said she felt a disturbance in the force. Something about seeing Sarah Jensen's Tesla tear out of town like the devil himself was chasing her. Tommy didn't look up. "Not now, Mike." "Yeah, that's not happening." Mike pulled up a stool, the same one he'd sat on for decades of conversations. "Want to tell me why you're sitting here in the dark, looking like you did the day she left 50 years ago? It's different now, is it?" Mike reached for the old town festival photo on Tommy's desk, a snapshot from 1972 showing the four of them. Tommy, Sarah, Mike and Clara at the summer fair. At the toe, because from where I'm sitting, I'm seeing the same stubborn fool who let pride get in the way of love back then. Tommy finally looked up. "She wanted to turn the shop into a corporate showroom." "That's not what Clara heard," Mike countered. "She heard Sarah was fighting her own board to keep this place authentic, to build something real here." He paused, studying his oldest friend. "You want to tell me what this is really about?" Tommy picked up the broken wrench, its crack visible in the fading light. "Maybe some things are too broken to fix." "Funny." Mike said, "I remember you telling Jake Martinez just last week that anything can be fixed if you care enough to try. Or does that wisdom only apply to carburetors?" "It's not that simple." "Of course it is." Mike leaned forward. "You're scared, Tommy. Scared that if you let her in again, if you build something together, she'll leave again. So you pushed her away first." He gestured at the letters on the desk. 50 years of words you never sent. And when you finally get the chance to say them out loud, you choose anger instead. Tommy's hands tightened around the wrench. "Her world and mine don't mix." "Bull!" Mike's voice was sharp. "Her world and yours mixed just fine when you were teaching her about engines while she taught you about computers. When Joseph let you turn his office into a workshop because he saw something special in both of you." He picked up one of the letters. "You've spent 50 years writing to each other about the same thing, regret. Now you've got a chance to build something that brings both your worlds together, and you're running scared." "I'm not running," Tommy protested. "I'm being realistic." "No, you're being a fool." Mike stood up, his patience visibly wearing thin. "You know what Clara said when she heard about Sarah's education center idea? She said it sounded exactly like what you and Sarah used to talk about back in high school. Making things better, teaching people to build and fix instead of just consume and discard." Tommy remembered those conversations. Late nights in the shop, dreaming about a future where they could make a real difference. That was a lifetime ago, and now you've got the chance to make it real. Mike moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "You know why this wrench cracked, Tommy? Because metal gets brittle if you don't use it. Same thing happens to hearts." He tapped the doorframe twice, an old habit from their youth. "Sarah's staying at the Valley Inn, room 212. Clara made sure to find out before Sarah checked in." He left Tommy alone with the broken wrench, the unread letters, and the weight of choices yet to be made. Through the window, the last light of day painted Millbrook Valley in shades of possibility, waiting to see what tomorrow might bring. Room 212 of the Valley Inn looked out over Main Street, offering a view of Mitchell's Auto Repair in the distance. Sarah stood at the window, phone in hand, staring at the email she'd drafted to her board. The cursor blinked at the end of her resignation letter, waiting for her to find the courage to send it. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, she found Tommy standing there, holding both the broken wrench and a new document in his hands. "Before you say anything," he started, "I need you to look at something." He held out the paper, a business partnership agreement he'd drawn up himself, the ink still fresh. "It's not as fancy as your corporate contracts, but it's honest." Sarah took it, scanning the handwritten terms. "A partnership?" 50-50, Tommy nodded. "The shop, the education center, everything. Not SJ Tech's project, not my legacy. Ours. Built together, run together like it should have been from the start." She looked up from the document, studying his face. What about your concerns, the corporate interference, the risk to your shop's reputation? Tommy held up the broken wrench. Mike reminded me of something important. You can't fix. What matters if you're too afraid to try? He set the wrench down on the room's small table. I've spent 50 years fixing other people's problems while leaving the biggest break in my own life unrepaired. I don't want to waste any more time. Sarah's hands tightened on the partnership agreement. The board won't like this. Let them dislike it. Tommy stepped closer. You're Sarah Jensen. You've changed the tech world once already. Now you want to change it again? Make it more about lasting value than disposable profits. So change it. But this time, let me help. Let me be the heart while you're the vision. Tommy, she set the agreement down next to the wrench. I was going to resign, walk away from it all. No, he said firmly, that's not the Sarah I knew. That's not the Sarah who built an empire from nothing but dreams and determination. He picked up the wrench again, running his finger along its crack. Some things break clean, make themselves easy to walk away from. But the important breaks, the ones that matter, they leave jagged edges that never quite fit with anything else. Sarah reached out, her fingers joining his on the wrenches. Worn surface. Like us? Like us, he agreed. 50 years of trying to find purpose in separate lives, when all along our greatest strength was what we could build together. She looked at their joined hands on the broken tool, her manicured fingers beside his work-roughened ones. It won't be easy. The board, the critics, the logistics of making this work. When has anything worth doing ever been easy? Tommy smiled. You taught me about integrated circuits while I taught you about carburetors. We built a computer from scratch in my father's office when everyone said it couldn't be done. We can build this too. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the angry ones she'd shed earlier. You really want to do this? Take on the corporate world? Build something completely new? With you? Yes. Tommy set the wrench down and picked up the partnership agreement. But we do it our way. Your vision and resources, my experience and community trust. Equal partners, building something that honors both our journeys. Sarah looked at the email, still open on her phone, the resignation letter she'd been about to send, and deleted it. Instead, she picked up a pen from the table and turned to the partnership agreement. Equal partners, she agreed, and signed her name beside the space Tommy had left for her. As she finished the signature, Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. One more thing, he said, opening it to reveal the now repaired wrench, carefully welded back together with a gold inlay filling the crack. Some breaks can't be erased, but they can be made into something beautiful, something stronger. Sarah traced the gold line running through the old steel. How did you? Called in a favor at the technical college. Their metallurgy instructor owed me for fixing his daughter's car. Tommy smiled. Turns out some brakes just need the right kind of repair. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Like the wrench, their brake had left marks that couldn't be erased. But perhaps those marks could become part of a new whole, something that combined past and present into a future neither of them could have imagined alone. 1 year later, the new sign gleamed in the morning sun. Mitchell and Jensen Classic Repairs and Technology Education Center. Below it, the original Mitchell's Auto Repair sign still hung, weathered but proud, a testament to the foundation upon which everything had been built. Tommy stood in the doorway of the expanded shop, watching Sarah lead a group of students through their morning workshop. She'd traded her designer suits for practical workwear, though she still managed to make shop clothes look elegant. The students, a mix of local kids and visitors from across the country, were gathered around an electric vehicle's diagnostic system. You see, Sarah was saying, her hands moving with the same enthusiasm she'd once shown while building that first computer. Understanding the software is only half the solution. You need to know the hardware too, feel how the components work together. Like Mr. Mitchell always says, Jake Martinez piped up from his position as student instructor, you can't fix what you don't understand. Tommy smiled, remembering how Many times his father had said those same words. The shop had evolved beyond anything Joseph Mitchell could have imagined, but its heart remained the same, a place where things got fixed, where people learned, where community mattered. The past year had brought changes that still amazed him. The education center had become a model for 5 others across the country, each one partnering with local mechanics and tech experts to create something unique to their communities. Sarah had faced down her board, transformed her company's approach to sustainability, and spent more time in Millbrook Valley than New York. "Morning, troublemaker," Mike's voice came from behind him, accompanied by the familiar scent of fresh apple fritters. "Quite a crowd today." "Full house," Tommy nodded, accepting his daily pastry. Sarah's new programs drawing people from both coasts. They watched as Sarah guided a student's hands through the proper way to connect a diagnostic tool. Her wedding ring, Tommy's mother's ring, restored and resized, caught the light as she moved. "You know what Clara said last night?" Mike leaned against the doorframe. "Said she hadn't seen either of you this happy in 50 years. Course she was crying when she said it. But you know, Clara." Tommy's hand went to his own ring, still new enough to feel remarkable on his finger. "We had to take the long way around, I guess. Had to become the people who could build this together." The morning light filled the expanded workshop, where classic cars sat beside cutting-edge electric vehicles, where old tools shared space with advanced diagnostic equipment, where the past and future had found a way to coexist and thrive. The repaired wrench held a place of honor on the wall, its gold-filled crack catching the light. Below it hung a photograph from their wedding 3 months ago, a small ceremony in the shop, surrounded by family, friends, and the community that had watched their story unfold across 50 years. Sarah finished her lesson and made her way over to them, stealing a bite of Tommy's fritter with the casual intimacy of absolute belonging. "Mike, Clara's still coming to teach that computer basics class for seniors this afternoon, right?" "Try." Stopping her, Mike grinned. "She's got her whole curriculum planned out." They stood together in the doorway, watching the morning unfold. A young woman pulled up in a Tesla with a check engine light on, while an old farmer arrived in his ancient pickup truck that needed its usual maintenance. In the classroom area, students of all ages worked on projects that bridged the gap between mechanical and digital worlds. "Did you ever think," Sarah asked softly, "that morning when my car broke down, that we'd end up here?" Tommy slipped his arm around her waist, remembering that day that now felt both yesterday and a lifetime ago. "Maybe not here exactly," he said, "but I knew something was coming full circle. Dad always said everything that breaks has a reason, if you're wise enough to learn from fixing it." Sarah leaned into him, their golden years turning out to be more adventure than retirement. "Your father was a wise man. He also said," Tommy added, watching Jake confidently guide a new student through their first diagnostic test, "that the best kind of legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you build for others to grow from." Around them, the shop hummed, with life and purpose. Not just a place where things got fixed, but where broken dreams got second chances, where wisdom bridged generations, and where love proved that sometimes the longest road home is the one most worth taking.